Tom Woods Show, episode 1475.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, there are a lot of people out there who will support you and will buy from you if you accept Bitcoin. But if you've ever wanted to accept payment in Bitcoin and were afraid that it would just be too complicated to figure out and set up, well, I have the solution. A free video series I've assembled that walks you through the process step by step and makes it really easy. Check it out at tomwoods.com/Bitcoin. Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. Gene Epstein, perennial favorite on the Tom Woods Show, returns today to talk about economist Joseph Stiglitz and his new book. We'll talk about that in a minute. Stiglitz is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. And in addition to this book, we're going to be talking about a column he wrote recently on the Green New Deal. Oh, just has to be seen to be believed, but you don't have to see it. I'm going to link to these columns, of course, to Gene's review and to this article and to the book. I'll link to them all at tomwoods.com/1475, but you don't have to read Stiglitz. You can listen to and trust Gene Epstein, formerly of Barron's, where he was economics and book review editor, and now director of the extraordinary Soho Forum, one of the greatest things in the history of the world. We'll have an opportunity to talk about that later in our conversation. Gene, welcome back.
Tom, it's great to be back and great to hear your voice. Last I glimpsed you, I left you in that Seattle airport while you were waiting for your plane. I had to desert you, Tom, because I had an earlier plane. That was after having had a great time on the Contra Cruise to Alaska. And I want to give a shout out to all my friends. First of all, Laura Blodgett and her husband, who I met on the Contra Cruise. She's the homeschooler who's been on your show. She and her husband are going to be guests in our home on the 9th and 10th to coincide with our next Soho Forum. So I'll be seeing her. You got me a friend. And then my friend Rosario Fortuno, who made a great suggestion at the Contra Cruise for a Soho Forum debate involving him, which I'm actually looking into. And then on top of that, Ryan Lopez, who is from L.A., and he's actually looking into a Soho Forum West in L.A. Ryan, you'll report back to me. Plus, perhaps my most memorable encounter was with a person who doesn't want his name to be divulged. He works for the Veterans Administration. He was on the Contra Cruise, and he told me about how it really works at the VA. And as a self-appointed scout for the Tom Woods Show, I asked him if he'd appear. I went to Tom. If you recall, I asked you about it, Tom, and you said, hey, we can disguise his voice. He decided he didn't want to appear, but he told me the most amazing stories about what really goes on at the VA. The main thing you've come away with on the Contra Cruise is there's just so many warm and wonderful and gregarious people. I think they're sort of self-selected group. I mean, it's such a friendly atmosphere. And then you meet so many interesting people. My favorite times really were the 2-hour dinners where we lingered over dinner with all the various people we were able to meet. My frustration, there was a guy from New Zealand who told a great story about how he became a free market libertarian. He told me he lives in Arizona. I never got a chance to talk to him very much. If you're listening to this, I give you a shout out, Mr. Guy who's in Arizona via New Zealand. Again, the main thing about the Contra Cruise is just all the warm and wonderful people you meet, the gregarious sort of self-selected people who want to get to know other people on the cruise. And so that's really the main thing I have to recommend about the Contra Cruise. It's a self-selected group of Tom Woods types who really want to get to know each other and socialize.
Well, that is a very nice endorsement. We thoroughly enjoyed having you. And for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, or you're a recent listener, Bob Murphy and I, economist Bob Murphy and I, host a cruise. We've done it 4 years in a row. We call it the Contra Cruise, sort of loosely based on our podcast, Contra Krugman. And it's been such a success. Everybody loves it. Gene was one of our special guests this year. We did it in July because of Alaska. That's when the Alaskan cruise season is. But we're going to return to form in 2020 and be cruising once again in October. So it's a ways off. The next cruise is a ways off, October 17th through 24th, 2020, cruising out of Port Canaveral in Florida. And this year we will have Scott Horton returning as a special guest. And we have somebody else whose arm we're trying to twist. I'll give people details about that. But we are already taking reservations. If you think, look, I got to do it, and early bird people do get a special bonus. So contracruise.com is where you want to go. But Gene, let's talk now. I appreciate very, very much your kind words.
And you were right. Did I so forum on the Contra Cruise, as you know, and you were very gracious in defeat, Tom. That showed real character, and I want to commend you on that. So that's all. It's all about human beings and character, and Tom rose to the occasion, gracious in defeat against Bob Murphy.
That's right. Bob and I had a cruise. We had Gene on board. Gene moderates debates more or less for a living. So we thought, why not have a debate and have Gene moderate it? So we debated pacifism, and Bob cleaned my clock in terms of the results. But it was such an enjoyable event. And I've got the video up at for people who support the show. Go to supportinglisteners.com. You got to be at least at the silver level of support. And I got that video for you, and Bob and I got some good zingers against each other. It was just tremendous fun. So that's how you can view it.
You picked up a couple of votes, Tom. He didn't.
I did. I picked up a couple, but Bob picked up more.
That's how he won. The real losses I've had 9 debates at the Soho Forum where people lose votes in the second round.
Well, there would have been so much shame involved in that, Gene.
You gained votes. So there you go. Just want to leave it at that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's talk about Joseph Stiglitz.
Stiglitz, him. Okay.
We talked about him back on episode 1249, which I'll link to on today's show notes page.
Last September, yeah.
Yeah, so it's been a while. Yeah. But he's got a brand new book, People, Power, and Profits, Progressive Capitalism for an Age of Discontent. He also has an article in The Guardian on the Green New Deal. We want to hit both of these.
Yeah, well,
so what's the general, is it more or less what we would expect the thesis of his book to be? What's he arguing?
Well, let me fill in a little bit here, Tom. In fact, do a little bit of like what you would do, and point out that when I spoke about Stiglitz last September, I introduced him. He's really a part of the sort of the unholy three. The unholy three being Krugman, Paul Krugman, who your listeners are pretty familiar with, Thomas Piketty, who's less prolific, but of course wrote the doorstop book on wealth and how we have to tax wealth to obliterate it. And then Joseph Stiglitz is a little less well known, but he really is out there. In a way, he's almost more important. He's sort of a gray eminence, older than Krugman. Krugman has called him an insanely great economist, genuflects to him every once in a while in his column. Stiglitz not only won a Nobel Prize, but he's really run the gamut of important jobs, chief economist under Clinton, chief economist of the World Bank, and he's hobnobbed with politicians. He's recently been involved. He made a public appearance with Ocasio-Cortez. He's spoken well and loudly on behalf of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And while he is in his late 70s, he could have a final act. So he's not inconsequential. He turns out book after book, and they pretty much say the same thing. To get to your question, Tom, I thought I was sort of done with Stiglitz in the long essay I did on his entire career, right from the start, on what he's really been all about. But he's sort of like the Zelig of economics. He's been there, done that. He hobnobbed with Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, publicly endorsed him. He was directly involved in giving a boost to Fannie and Mae and Freddie Mac with respect to the housing bubble, declaring in 2002 in a consulting report that their mortgages were rock solid. He's been around the block. And so I was asked by the Manhattan Institute, since I'm sort of like a Stiglitz specialist with them, to review his 2019 book, People, Power, and Profits, Progressive Capitalism for an Age of Discontent. And I think the book sort of speaks for itself. I want to dig into aspects of it, but I want to point out the really surprising thing, that the book was published in 2019, but it has virtually nothing about the environment, does not mention the Green New Deal. It's very possible that the manuscript arrived. Obviously, there's a long lead time. This is a Norton book, that the Green New Deal had never even been mentioned. But certainly the concern about global warming, climate change, that's years old. Stiglitz somehow or other served up his old bromides, but barely mentioned it, just very glancingly touches on it in his book. And here's the interesting part of it. It really almost is major reference to the environment. He talks about how we cleaned up smog in London and Los Angeles at a small cost to each individual and firm. That was at a small cost to each individual and firm. So he's talking about costs, small costs. He's at least got his head screwed on right. Now, in the same year, in 2019, in June, he publishes an article about the Green New Deal, and suddenly he's got a totally different theme. And I want to read a few sentences from it in order to give you a sense of where he's at now. This is a paragraph I sent to you, Tom. The war on the climate emergency, if correctly waged, would actually be good for the economy, just as the Second World War set the stage for America's golden economic era with the fastest rate of growth in its history amid shared prosperity. The Green New Deal would stimulate demand, ensuring that all available resources were used, and the transition to the green economy would likely usher in a new boom. Trump's focus on the industries of the past, like coal, is strangling the much more sensible move to wind and solar power. More jobs by far will be created in renewable energy than will be lost in coal. Now, that's a stunner. First of all, it stunned me because it's such an incredible leap from what he wrote in his book in that same year, barely mentioning the environment and actually talking about costs every once in a while. Now, suddenly it's no longer about costs, it's about jobs. More jobs by far will be created in renewable energy than will be lost in coal. And, I wanted to add I would add a satirical sentence to that just to extend the logic. Let's abandon our focus on vehicles of the past like cars, trucks, and planes. More jobs by far will be created by human-powered rickshaws, pedicabs, and sailing ships.
Yeah. Right. And in fact, can we also point out that let's imagine that the situation was there's an asteroid hurtling toward Earth.
Beautiful, Tom. I was about to prompt you, Tom. You told that story when you were when you were discussing the Green New Deal with my non-relative but good friend, Alex Epstein. Go ahead, take it.
Okay, all right. I love what a fan of the Tom Woods Show Gene is.
It was inspired, Tom. Do it. And I want to elaborate on it, but go ahead.
The Gene remembers my analogies and the precise moment that I uttered them. But there's an asteroid hurtling toward Earth. So obviously we have to divert a lot of our resources to trying to shoot it down or protect ourselves from it. Now, then suppose somehow it burned up in the atmosphere and it's no longer a threat. Yeah. It seems like somebody like Stiglitz would be disappointed that, darn, we were about to be rich thanks to this emergency. And it's a shame that the emergency has been averted. But it does sound like the logic of what he's saying.
Yeah, no, indeed. I think it's an inspired skit for like the internet people. The emergency is coming. We've got to build it and all the rest. And then we quote Stiglitz. This is going to be wonderful for the economy, and everybody's exuberant. It's going to create more jobs than anything else ever before. And then it doesn't come. The asteroids decide to switch course, and Stiglitz and the rest of us are just really downhearted that we missed this opportunity anyway to create all these jobs. The problem with Stiglitz, it's almost as though I've ended on a bump, and how can you take the guy seriously from here? He's no longer even concerned with how much the Green New Deal is going to cost, what the trade-offs were. He was at least mentioning trade-offs, when he was talking about the small cost to each individual and firm that was incurred when we got rid of smog in Los Angeles. That's fine. At least that's not completely dumb. But now it's all about wind and solar power creating jobs. Let me tell, you're not going to remember the episode, Tom, but I think I've probably told the Milton Friedman story. He's in Egypt. He's noticing that, I think they're building a dam. And he notices that the workers are using hand shovels. I guess this is literally true. And he asks his guide, why aren't they using steam shovels? And the guide says, well, this is also not just a public works project. It's also a job boosting project by government. And Friedman probably said it because he was a quick-witted guy. Well, then they shouldn't be using shovels. They should be using spoons to dig in the earth. And again, this is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He's got a textbook out that sold well. He was at Stanford. He's now a high-paid economist at Columbia University. And he's telling us that the way we progress the way the economy progresses is by creating jobs. And that's why I did my little reductio ad absurdum. Let's go back to rickshaws, pedicabs, and sailing ships. He's not the least bit concerned with what it's going to cost, with the way it's going to impoverish us. We could get into focusing on this paragraph about the Green New Deal, we could get into this insanity about wind and solar power, but it's almost impossible to take Stiglitz seriously from here because he's not the least bit concerned about whether wind and solar power can actually serve the energy needs of an advanced industrial economy. He wants a war. He's calling it our third world war. And that's the interesting part of it, which is that he didn't think to put it in his book. But the moment they start talking about the Green New Deal, he reverts to the insanity of the Keynesians. Suddenly it's a war. Now, obviously, I guess he got that analogy. I shouldn't even say he's that original. He got that analogy from AOC and the rest of them who've been analogizing it with a war. But, we can at least let's talk about the Second World War, Tom, and what it really did. We should all recommend Robert Higgs on this subject. And, when Higgs wrote about this, he started with the simplest point of all about how World War II enriched us, how we got better off when the war started. And then he went into some actually more complicated numbers. But a simple point, by the way, was simply based upon calculating how many people were working in consumer industry, in non-war industries before the war began, and then how many people were working in non-war industries once the war started. And he points out that there was a noticeable drop in the number of people working in non-war peacetime industries. So on that basis alone, we got poorer. And of course, the people who replaced them, of course, what happened is we drafted a lot of people into the army, and then the people who replaced them were less skilled. So the idea that World War II put us on the stage for a golden economic era is such a sad fallacy. It's such a horrible, crazy thing to say, that the disaster of war is what enriches us. So let's kiss that off as well. Let me see what else I want to.
Let me jump in on that, Gene. First, just to note that I will put on the show notes page, which for today is tomwoods.com/1475, not only Stiglitz's column on the Green New Deal and your review of his book, but I'll also link to our episode about him, and I'll link to the episode I did on World War II and the Great Depression, so people can understand why, in even greater detail, it's wrong to make that claim. But one other thing, I'm sometimes reminded of in situations like this, of the claims people will make to the effect that it's a shame that the United States has the crime that it does, but on the other hand, thanks to the crime that we have, we lead the world in the crime prevention devices industry.
Oh, really?
And I've heard that argument that because now we have better burglar alarms and we have better technology for that, and so actually it's had a good economic effect. But that's the same fallacy. I mean, obviously, it would have been better for us not to have to devote resources to that.
Yeah.
If we hadn't had the crime, we could have devoted the resources to something else. So it's not a benefit. Why? I mean, how can these people be such blockheads?
Yeah.
He asks rhetorically.
Yeah, no, indeed. There was I don't know if you put in your discussion of World War II, the Keynesians who were predicting, who were not only predicting that the Great Depression would return after the end of World War II, because we could not allow those 11 million soldiers to come home. They would flood the labor markets. I mean, that in itself was a fascinating story. And indeed, Alvin Hansen, prominent Keynesian in 1943, was publicly urging that we not demobilize the army because it would be devastating for the economy. And so, again, it was just such a shameful period for the Keynesians, and it just gets you a little depressed that years later, Stiglitz, seeing this rhetoric about the Green New Deal, can unfurl once again that hoary fallacy. I want to, in looking over what I wanted to cover with Stiglitz, I was almost inclined to say that I'd like to just focus on the stuff that's kind of bad, but not dumb, wrong, but not completely crazy. And I'm going to do that in a minute, but I wanted to mention a few other things where he amazingly shoots from the hip, where he does start talking about raising money to pay for the Green New Deal. And then he mentions that it's lucky that we have a poorly designed tax system that's regressive and rife with loopholes. Now, again, I assume, would Paul Krugman call our tax structure regressive? I mean, regressive has a narrow definition. The narrow definition is that the rich get taxed on a percentage basis less than the poor. Less than the rest of us, that the richer you get, the lower your tax burden rather than the higher. I mean, would anybody say that? And yet it's amazing what a loose cannon he's become, that we have a regressive tax structure. And then he talks in terms of the new Green New Deal about how the trillions that we can raise by taxing the rich, again, echoing Elizabeth Warren and the rest, but completely forgetting that that in a way World War II does relate to this, because it's the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office that keeps repeating that we are headed toward a debt to GDP ratio that was on a par with the last year or two of World War II. That when the U.S. was at war, the debt really did pile up to GDP. But then there was demobilization. The government military expenditures collapsed. The peacetime economy took over, and the debt to GDP ratio fell. And the Congressional Budget Office points out that we are now in, so to speak, relative peace. We have unending wars, but nothing nearly so devastating as the effort to fight World War II. But we are climbing back to that situation, and the Congressional Budget Office keeps warning that we could face a fiscal crisis. The point that's so appalling in this case is that Stiglitz, again, leaves that off the table. We don't already have a crushing budget deficit. We don't already have a climbing debt that's threatening the economy. And I'm quoting, I like to quote the Congressional Budget Office because it's nonpartisan. It tends to be Keynesian to begin with. And so it's really basically a sort of an unimpeachable source. And yet Stiglitz thinks, along with Elizabeth Warren and the rest of those people, that we can spend trillions of additional dollars raised through taxes and not feel the pinch. They're completely ignoring the fact that we already face a fiscal crisis of the state. Let me, I guess, mention a few other things that so pop out because they're crazy. In this case, I'm reverting to the book. In the book, that book about progressive capitalism, he tells us, he writes, quote unquote, the evidence that our economy is becoming less competitive is all around us. This is all set up for the fact that he wants antitrust to come down hard on big tech, on all of those big companies that keep cutting prices for us that we supposedly hate. But this I like. He says some of it is obvious about a less competitive economy, and he goes on to write, we see it in the United States. We see it in the limited choices we face for cable TV or the internet or telephone services. Now, if I actually had Stiglitz at my Soho Forum, although he wasn't debating, I might have asked him from the stage, I said, you're a couple of years older than I. Do you remember what it was like to listen to TV when we were young? Do you remember what it was like to communicate or to make a long distance phone call? I'm talking to you on Skype, Tom. I mean, the incredible range of choice that we have with cable TV, with the internet, with streaming, with telephone services is just amazing. And yet this guy is saying that things have become less competitive, that we have limited choice. Again, I guess I'm shooting tuna fish in a barrel, but I want to do one that's a little more subtle, and where I guess I will be at least informing your listeners of something interesting. Here's something else where he talks about, of course, we need to bear down on capitalism. We need to control it. We need to make them more long-term oriented rather than short-term. He writes as follows in the book: shareholder interests have come to mean not long-term investors who care about the firm over a period of years or decades, but short-term speculators who care only about the stock price today, squeezing every dollar of short-run profits with little regard to the long-run consequences. Now, I wonder how some of your listeners would respond to that statement. I had a hobby horse for a lot of years about this, and it was simply that, and it was ultimately a little bit mistaken and exaggerated. What was my hobby horse? Well, who is it that requires quarterly reporting from our publicly traded companies? It's the government. It's an SEC rule that every 3 months you have to calculate your profits and report to the shareholders. That's a one-size-fits-all, short-term oriented kind of thing where you have to expose your company's situation every 3 months. If we just let the free market do it, let companies traded on the stock exchanges make up their own minds or conform to certain free market standards, probably some would report monthly, depending upon the nature of your enterprise. Some would report yearly. Many hedge funds only report yearly. And so the reporting requirements of government are part of the problem. But I have a colleague, friend, a professor of accounting at NYU. He should be on your show, Tom, named Baruch Lev. And he writes a lot about this subject. And he wrote something that brought me up short quite a while ago, and I want to read it, about the supposed idea that the quarterly earnings even make much of a difference when it comes to short-termism. He writes as follows: would managers allegedly obsessed with increasing quarterly earnings invest annually over $2 trillion, yes, trillion, in long-term intangible assets, R&D, IT, brands, designs, unique business processes, when much of this investment hits the bottom line, expensed in the income statement? Of course not. Just the aggregate annual investment in R&D, all expensed by accountants, exceeds $350 billion. And if managers are short-term oriented, increasing quarterly earnings at the expense of long-term growth, how to explain the decades-long growth in U.S. corporate sales and earnings? If this is short-termism, let's have more of it. Now, that brought me up short, and maybe it tells your listeners something they didn't quite realize about the immense amounts that are spent by our corporations, those hated corporations, in terms of with an eye toward the long term, that that clobbers their earnings because they cannot capitalize it. They can't take just a piece of it and amortize it. They have to expense it. So that clobbers their earnings. And of course, the poster boy for this is, of course, Jeff Bezos, who's got this, $1 trillion company with not a whole lot of earnings declared because he constantly punishes his bottom line with investment in expenses that have to be subtracted from the bottom line rather than capitalized.
Gene, before we carry on here, no doubt there's more Stiglitz idiocy to cover. I got to just briefly speak to the folks. Folks, it's time for the story of Bad Luck Ichabod. Poor Bad Luck Ichabod. He was the first to get the pink slip when the recession hit because he didn't distinguish himself on the job in any way. He had no particular skill that everybody else didn't have. He didn't stay up on developments in his industry, become proficient in new platforms, nothing. If only Bad Luck Ichabod had known what you Tom Woods Show listeners know, and that is that there's an amazing platform called Skillshare where you can learn skills that can help you on the job, help you build a side hustle, or just help you enjoy a hobby more fully. Business, photography, design, you name it, it's all there at Skillshare. So thank goodness you're not like that schmuck Bad Luck Ichabod. Thank goodness you're a Tom Woods Show listener. And you know that you can get 2 free months of Skillshare. That's right, you can join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with that special offer. Skillshare is offering Tom Woods Show listeners 2 months of unlimited access to over 30,000 classes for free. To sign up, go to Skillshare.com/woodsfree. Again, go to Skillshare.com/woodsfree to start your 2 months now. That's Skillshare.com/woodsfree. Gene, I want to come back to you with something that you were implying before, which is that Stiglitz may be wrong about a bunch of things, but he's not dumb, and you're not trying to portray him as an idiot. So maybe elaborate on that.
I want to correct you here, Tom. Anybody who says that the virtue of wind and solar, their advantage over coal, is that wind and solar create far more jobs than coal does. Anybody who says that does not belong at any table where economics is seriously discussed. And the only reason why we keep having to talk about Stiglitz is he won't go away. He's whispering in the ears of Elizabeth Warren. God forbid, but it could happen that Elizabeth Warren takes the White House and brings him in as her chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. So we do have to understand who Stiglitz is. We do have to understand how lunatic he is, who gets turned on by the Green New Deal because it's going to be another World War III. But I don't want to beat a dead horse, so to speak. I don't want to say that he's always an idiot. And I want at least to get your readers to benefit, your listeners rather, to benefit a little bit more from this discussion by focusing on stuff in his book that's wrong, but not completely dumb. So I want to do this in more abstract discussion. Why government? Stiglitz, in his book, the book that I reviewed, gives us several reasons for why government has to take a proactive role in the economy. And I want to go over a few of them and discuss them. This is at least somebody, trying to raise the question in an open-minded way, who isn't a complete lunatic. And the first one he begins with is what he calls the innovation economy. And, we're familiar with that. Basic research and all of that, it has to be conducted by government. And the usual mantra is, there's no direct profit in basic research, and so government has to finance it. And isn't that kind of a no-brainer? We obviously need government to do that, and that's a clear market failure. And that's why we have, basic research financed by government. Well, at least that's interesting, an interesting talking point. And I would have two responses. Oddly, until I became familiar with the work of Terence Keeley, who I know is a name that you might remember, Tom.
I love that guy.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I know. Well, you had a story about that, but interestingly, I used to say the following, which I still think holds up, which is this: that if we actually look at privately funded research organizations, the concern over cancer, the concern over various killing diseases, hospitals, where does the philanthropic dollar go? The philanthropic dollar goes, even with incredible crowding out, it goes to the universities, to the research places, to the hospitals, to the research hospitals. There is so much charitable money already available for basic research that it's very difficult for me to imagine that there'd be much to worry about, especially when you bear in mind that, at least in the U.S., so much of the byproducts of the good stuff of basic research actually comes from military spending. So the U.S. government spends about $1,000 on weaponry and killing for every dollar it spends on research, and that's just an incredible waste. So the little of basic research benefit that comes from government spending, one would think, could easily be taken up by the private sector, by private charity. But yeah, you mentioned Terence Keeley, and I think, didn't you say that you tried to get him on the show and then you were lost contact, you weren't able to follow? You never had
Then Ben Powell put me in contact with him again, and he said, I'd be delighted to be on your show. He's at Cato at this point.
Yeah.
And then look, I'm not going to bring up my feud with them, but as always happens with anybody affiliated with them, all of a sudden they stop writing. They stop writing to me.
My God.
Dangerous Woods, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's too bad because I promoted his book, The Economic Laws of Scientific Research, many times. It's a great book.
Yeah.
Whether or not he wants to come on the show, I'll say it's a great book because that's the kind of guy I am.
Oh God, that brings me down, Tom. That brings me down. I didn't know. I mean, I know you mean he's a Cato guy, so he can't appear on your show. Wow.
I don't look. All I'm saying is that's what happens with all Cato people, or they get fired. I mean, I've had people who are now former Cato people. I mean, I don't know.
Well, Tom, I was about, I thought you'd lost contact with him. I thought that was the story. That's interesting.
That was the story.
Yeah. But then there's a sequel to it, which you just told me, the very depressing sequel about the free exchange of ideas.
But you know what? Who needs him? I got Gene Epstein. All right, Gene Epstein, who talks about as much as 4 guests. So who needs these people?
Thanks. Right. Yeah, my Gene Epstein soliloquies. And my Bernie Sanders lookalike that you also have. That's why you should have me on video, Tom. But anyway, that aside, I did read much of his book. It's a little heavy going, but certainly he's got great stuff. And I thought, if you wanted to schedule it, Tom, I'd read it all, and you and I could talk about it in his absence and celebrate his insights. If you turn to the chapter called "The Real Economics of Research," then you find something interesting. Just to recapitulate the bidding here, I do think it's sufficient to argue that when the microwave and other things come out of military spending, that that's sort of like that thank God for small favors. That the military has to spend so much money, and the research we get out of it is just this and that. And of course, it's a complete myth that the military created the internet. We could go into that as well. But I think in a way it is a proper response to say that the philanthropic dollar loves research, loves basic research. When Michael Milken was calling for the government to spend trillions on cancer research, my God, what a crazy foolish statement that was. I mean, cancer kills rich people. It kills the old. It kills people of means. We could easily finance all the cancer research we want through the private sector. And on top of that, the way the government monopolizes the research, as I think people like Mary Ruark have pointed out to us, I think also another person who's been on the guest on your show, that a lot of the research projects become crony-oriented and not very productive. But that's my setup for the final insight of Terence Keeley, who basically has taught us, as he writes, and I'll read a couple of sentences, citing research that has shown that industrialists fund a considerable amount of basic science within their own companies. That he shows us that despite what I was willing to accept, the idea that a profit-oriented company is not going to invest in basic research, apparently they do. And then he asked another question, a separate question: would companies under laissez-faire fund academic science, i.e. science performed within universities? Historically, they did. And then it goes into an elaborate discussion of how, before the government came on the scene, industries were indeed financing basic research. So that's a very old canard played, going back to Stiglitz, it's not completely dumb. It's just wrong. And it's often accepted, the myth that without government, we would not have basic research. Let me get to the next one. Tell me when we're running out of time. I probably will be able to exhaust them in the time you've given to me. The next one being, again, Stiglitz's defense in an abstract sense, sort of laying the groundwork for why we need government, why we need a proactive government in the economy. And he lists the urban economy, the complications of running a city. And, there are lots of, he's just talking about how you need traffic lights and you need, regulations to run a city. You need rules. You need to have a law against noise pollution, all the rest of it. Walter Block, of course, the great Rabbi Block, can address a lot of that. Clearly, if somebody's making noise, then that's clearly a tort. The courts can deal with that. It's not as though we feel we libertarians believe that there's no laws, there's no rule of law, whether you're an ANCAP or you're a minarchist. But the real problem with what Stiglitz is talking about is how unaware he is of the real problems in so many urban economies, that the urban economies as run by local government. And that, I mean, is the way in which housing is unaffordable in places like Manhattan, Brooklyn, San Francisco, places where there are a lot of good jobs, but where it's so expensive for people to live, all because of government-imposed rules and regs. I was by the way, on my way to the Contra Cruise, I stopped by in Portland, and I visited with a professor at Portland State who talked about, the smart growth in Portland, which has meant that the number sticks in my mind of at least 250,000 or 500,000 acres of land cannot be developed, and that's why the housing prices are out of sight. The control over building, which of course a lot of the crony capitalists like, it creates a cartel within the cities. So my only point is that that's the real downside of having government involved in cities, how difficult it becomes for people to live in so many of these cities, although happily we have, unless of course Texas goes completely politically blue and goes the way of San Francisco and New York, we do have cities where housing is affordable, but where there are very good jobs that people could get, but where there are very good jobs that people could get, as in Portland, as in Seattle, as in San Francisco, that's a problem. Stiglitz doesn't acknowledge that, all of the downside of involving government. And then, of course, we have the scandal of the way government manages the water supply. And you and Bob, I think, were talking about that at one point. Of course, the big scandal in Michigan, and now we've got a scandal in Newark. So the idea that simply because cities are so much complex, you need rules, you need traffic lights, and you need to tell people to drive on the right, all of those things requiring government, that's a little bit ridiculous. But again, Stiglitz seems to be tone deaf to all the evils of what government can do through its zoning restrictions, through rent control, rent stabilization. I live in New York, and amazingly, the New York Times can never acknowledge the simple point that the crackdown on rent control, the tightening of the rent control regs, empirically, factually, only benefit the well-off. Those are the people who've got the rent control departments, by and large. And so, again, it's just pure insanity when you have a guy like Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, running our government. So, again, it's difficult to accept Stiglitz's idea that we need urban government, we need proactive government because of the complications of the urban economy. He then has another one called the complex economy, which is a long story, but one of those, and of course he talks about the complex economy, and he pretended to have read Hayek, to have read the free market Austrians, not the least bit understanding that the more complex an economy is, the more we need the knowledge of the dispersed free market, the more we need the price system in order to coordinate the complex economy, and the more impossible it becomes for government to control it. But again, of course, this is somebody who writes about the glories of the Green New Deal and how we want to reallocate labor to the Green New Deal. So clearly he's tone deaf to that. And then in the complex economy, he talks about, then he goes on to talk about the economy in flux. that are related to the complex economy and the economy in flux is, of course, the fact that innovation is happening. And of course, how could we imagine that if Stiglitz and his cronies got a chance to controlling the investment funds in our economy, how can we imagine that Steve Jobs would have gotten his smartphone accepted by them? Steve Jobs, one of the least charmless people apparently anybody's ever met, who was nonetheless a driven genius who had his own money to allocate into innovation. The other related point in the economy in flux, he has the goal, of course, to point out that we've had boom and bust, forgetting again that he was a cheerleader for the boom which led to bust, the housing bust that brought us the 2008 recession. And in the final analysis, maybe I could just conclude that this is somebody who's giving us a discussion of the importance of the role of government, but he himself, with all his lunacies, the facts he makes up, the grandiosity, the clear love of power that he suffers from, he himself is a poster boy for why we need to avoid economies in which people like him, who presume to be philosopher kings, have any power over the rest of us.
Wow, Gene, that is good. Well, Gene, I'm happy to say that even though you are no longer book review editor for Barron's, at least you have the Tom Woods Show to get terrible books off your chest. I'm here to facilitate that, and it's important. I wouldn't want you to keep them bottled up. Who knows what would happen.
That's good, Tom, because, yeah, exactly. I need to get these soliloquies out, as you put it. And what else? Oh, yeah. And Tom, I assume you're going to allow me to do a plug for for Soho Forum.
Yes, absolutely. I was just writing down thesohoforum.org. It's one of the highlights of living in the New York City area. Absolutely. If you're not going to these debates on a monthly basis, there's something the matter with you.
That's right.
I want Gene to say something about it in a minute. But of course, remember, the key thing everybody knows now, you go up to Gene, you say Tom Woods, you get a free drink at the bar. Right. All right, Gene, what do you want to say to us about it?
Well, I want to say that on September 10th, we are having an event that is going to be sold out, I think, in a few days. It's Dave Smith, who will be debating Nicholas Sarwark on the future of the Libertarian Party. And on top of that, we're going to have a fundraiser after the debate. That's on September 10th, fundraiser after the debate in my loft apartment. And we will be graced by a lot of different people. The guy from Black Guns Matter, of Michael Heiss, doing a panel discussion of the future of the Libertarian Party. Laura Blodgett and her husband from the Contra Crew is going to be with me. Unfortunately, Tom can't make it. But Tom, how many times have you seen the play that goes wrong? At least twice, or is it 3 times?
Oh, it's probably like a dozen. Are you kidding me? Because I bring friends to it. I proselytize for it.
Okay, right. But you love to sit through it and watch them laugh. Well, anyway, I've seen it once. I enjoyed it. I will tell you, it's British musical comedy. It's an import.
No, not musical. There's no musical.
No, I'm sorry. I said music hall comedy.
Hall comedy.
That's what I meant.
Okay, yeah.
It's not sophisticated comedy. It's right, Tom. It's doors and farce and
I'm a simple man, Gene.
Yeah, okay, but it's very good. It's very good. And look, you people out there, Tuesday, September 10th is going to be the Soho Forum. You want to stick around for the matinee the following day, a Wednesday, and catch a matinee of the play that goes wrong. And you can think of Tom Woods the whole time.
I don't know that they do. I think they do only weekend matinees. There may not be a Wednesday matinee.
Okay.
So I know it's very unusual on Broadway, but see some matinee while you're in town, because if you're not seeing a Broadway show, you are missing out on one of the great pleasures of life.
I guess the show is so exhausting to do that I guess it's kind of difficult to do.
Well, I asked the main character after the show once about it. I said, does this ever get to be a drag, or is it always fun? He says, it really is always fun, except when I arrive on a Friday night and I know I've got the Friday night show, the Saturday matinee, the Saturday night show, the Sunday matinee, the Sunday night show, and it's exhausting
again
to put on that show.
Well, there you go.
Times.
There you go. I'm an aficionado of Broadway and resident Manhattan, and here this out-of-towner, Tom Woods, corrects my little facts about a Wednesday. Wednesday matinees are pretty much sacrosanct for the...
Right, except Phantom of the Opera has a Thursday matinee precisely to stand out from the others, so that when you have nothing to do on a Thursday, you have no show to see other than Phantom, so they have that.
Tom is a walking encyclopedia. Tom, what do you recommend for a Wednesday matinee on Broadway? What's offhand? What have you liked? So I can recommend to...
Well, the trouble is, since I've been there, there's been a bit of turnover.
So the stuff you really liked is no longer playing.
So I don't really know, but you can't go wrong with the Phantom, and I bet To Kill a Mockingbird is worth seeing.
Yeah, if you can get tickets for it, yeah, absolutely. The Phantom is a great opera.
And Ben Crawford, who's playing the Phantom right now, is a worthy Phantom. He's very good.
Okay, that's the thing. That's the package. It's the Tom Woods-like package. When Tom comes to town, he catches a Soho Forum, and then he sees a couple of Broadway shows. And so
that's right.
You want to do it the way Tom does it. When in doubt, do it the way Tom does it, except you don't want to schedule your plane flight out of Seattle the way Tom did, because you sat in that airport for a lot of hours.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's a lot of... In fact, we got to wrap up this episode before people start turning it off, listening to my travails in the airport.
All right, Tom, a pleasure as always. And please come. I hope to see you all. And Tom will be there in spirit on September 10th for the next Soho Forum. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Gene. The website is thesohoforum.org, and I appreciate everybody listening, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right, folks, I cannot resist reading this to you. I cannot resist it. I was going to read one or two sentences, but I just love this. This is the kind of project that warms my heart. One of my listeners just wrote the following, because he has a website called newmillenniumwealth.com. And he says, I'm a 30-year-old millennial, yes, millennial, living in Dallas with my wife and 2 beagles. I unfortunately spent money on a bachelor's degree in business administration, only to discover my passion for Forex trading, something they don't teach in college. I can't learn enough about trading, investing, financial markets, economics, Austrian economics to be specific, and any vehicle that can produce wealth and freedom. I have no desire to work under someone else in a cubicle, punching numbers, making someone else rich instead of myself. I know that sounds egotistical and optimistic, but I feel that in today's world, there are infinite ways to be your own boss, make as much money as you can, and work hard doing what you want. My eyes were opened when I discovered trading, and I now see a future vastly different from what I thought I wanted in college. I'm an aspiring Forex trader on my way to becoming consistently profitable. I spend my day testing trading strategies, reading as much as I can, and learning about economics, both past and present, and I'm willing to work hard to achieve what I want, financial freedom and wealth. And then he goes on to say, I'm not an overnight success. I do not hold the secret to making money in the markets. I'm not a rags to riches story. If you're looking for a get-rich-quick program, I'm not the guy for you. My main focus of this blog is to create a community of individuals who are all passionate about the same things I am, and to help guide and educate others to create wealth and success that will last for their lifetimes and for generations to come. One of my biggest goals is to become financially free, primarily through trading and investing, and to help others by sharing with them all the knowledge I have accumulated about personal finance, trading, investing, economics, and entrepreneurship over the past several years. My hope and desire is for you to follow me on my journey so that you can become financially free with me. So he's got a lot more to say, but very much worth checking out. I mean, isn't that great? Imagine somebody who's 30 years old, whose head is screwed on right like that. Very rare these days, unfortunately. newmillenniumwealth.com. I'm going to link to that at tomwoods.com/1475. I mean, I'm just always telling you guys about things my listeners are doing, right? This is the kind of person who listens to this show, and I'm proud of that. That's really, really great. And I hope that in return, I can give this fellow a boost with some nice targeted traffic from you guys to go check out what he has to say and how he can help you. So newmillenniumwealth.com. And if you would like me to help you, then get your web hosting through my link. You get a great deal on it, and you'll get nice free traffic from me along with several other very, very valuable bonuses. Get the details on all that at tomwoods.com/publicity, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.